Careful, don't hit that.
So good evening, everyone.
I was at a committee with individual council this morning anyway,
So good evening, everyone. My name is Michael Barrett, and I have the honor of being able to work with some very esteemed and talented individuals at the Lakefield Historical Society. So, we're very, very honored that you are attending tonight, and we're very, very honored to be able to have our guest speaker here tonight as well. So, and I really appreciate people coming tonight. This is fantastic. We'd like to be able to start with our land acknowledgement, and then I will certainly introduce our esteemed guest and speaker tonight. But certainly, for myself, I wanted to make sure that the land acknowledgement was indeed both meaningful and also relevant. So, I mean, I have a very, very good friend of mine that I served as a school board trustee with, Crystal, who is a member of the Curve Lake Band, and I communicated with Crystal to say, Crystal, please help me being able to understand and to make sure that a land acknowledgement indeed is relevant. Because a land acknowledgement, as she certainly explained to me, cannot be something that is just rote. It should not be just an obligation. It should also be something that recognizes. And she said, Michael, I know who you are. She said, make sure that the most important thing in a land acknowledgement is that you speak from the heart. So I hope to be able to do that tonight and to be able to do the land acknowledgement. As I mentioned to a couple people here tonight, I was a high school history teacher and could not find a full-time job. And finally, after having 5 kids, I said to my wife, I think I need a full-time job that has birth control as a side benefit. So, or else we're going to end up with 22 kids in as many years. So I moved on to some other things. But certainly I attended the University of Toronto for 4 years. I have an undergrad degree in both Canadian American and European history. I attended Teachers College as well. And I will tell you that not once during any of my education was there really any acknowledgement with regards to the history, the teaching of the history, being able to recognize the contribution of our First Nations. And when I attended as a school board trustee my first session on residential schools, I was both embarrassed and I was saddened that our educational system had not been able to recognize that there are more than one pathways, there are more than one community, and there are first communities that we were not recognized. So for myself, on being able to be able to stand here tonight in front of our esteemed speaker, indeed is both an honor and it's also humbling. Because I think that from this standpoint, that I always said I was a teacher, standing at the front of the room talking about history, but tonight we are all the students because we're here to be able to listen to another history, to be able to listen to the first history. And from that standpoint, I offer up this First Nations land acknowledgement. So we respectfully acknowledge that the former village of Lakefield is located on Treaty 20, Michi Saagiig territory, the traditional territory of Michi, Saagiig, and Chippewa nations, collectively known as the Williams Treaties First Nations, which include Curve Lake, Hiawatha, Alderville, Saagiig Island, Rama, Wasilil, and Georgina Island First Nations. The Lakefield Historical Society respectfully acknowledges that the Williams Treaties First Nations are the stewards and caretakers of these lands and waters in perpetuity, and that they continue to maintain this responsibility to ensure their health and integrity for nations to come. So again, it is my honor to be able to welcome Chief Knott tonight. And in some of the conversations that I've had with people tonight, they have certainly talked about the treat that we are in for tonight. And I do have an introduction for Chief Knott, because as we know, Chief Knott grew up in Curve Lake and has devoted his life.
Michael, if I could,
A little closer?
no, we'll do the movie first and then come back.
Oh, and then do the introduction. Okay, that's why Michael is the chair and I'm not. So what we will do tonight is we are first going to show a video, Place Where I Belong, and then I will introduce Chief Knott, as he will be able to speak to us as well. So, all right, Michael.
Okay.
I'm going to today talk about the creation story. So years ago, Nana Bojo and Bibone had a disagreement. And Nana Bojo said, Bibone, you are the spirit of the cold weather, the winter, that gives us rest. But I can beat you. I can warm you up. So Nana Bojo tried, but Bibone won out. And we had ice here in our land of the Anishinaabe for a long, long time and made the Anishinaabe move away to the south. Nana Bojo with them got together with a spirit of the south called Nibin, and Shawin also was involved, which is a spirit of that area. So together, three of them came and made the earth warm again. And so Bibone conceded and said, yeah, I'll be able to negotiate where it'll be cold for 6 months of the year and you can have the warmth for 6 months of the year. So that's how come today in Anishinaabe territory we both have summer and winter, an in-between stage called fall and spring. In this area is the homeland of the Mississauga Anishinaabe. The Mississauga Anishinaabe are of the bigger group called the Anishinaabe. This has been their traditional territory forever. We were created here, and we're still here. Other people have come and gone, and still visitors come and live with us, and we've given them permission to be here. But just prior to the coming of the European, some interesting dynamics were happening here in Ontario. People from the south came to us and asked if they could grow corn here. We yearly met, made peace with each other, we smoked the pipe together, we made wampum together, which is like a pact, an agreement, a contract. And we do this every year. They recognize this is our traditional territory and they're only visitors. But we let them live here. And we call them the Antawad. Antawad means people who live in houses. You call them the Hurons. Remember, around about that time, other things started to happen. The European introduced some diseases. They also introduced some guns to our traditional Hinmi to the south. And there was skirmishes, and consequently there was dispersal. The Hurons, they were in fact almost eliminated and annihilated. We had to back off a little bit because of disease and the flexing of muscle by the Haudenosaunee Nodwa, as we call them, people to the south who are ones who disagree with it over time. But we could coexist, but it seemed there was this heightened pressure. And so by the mid-1600s, around 1650 to 1655, this part of our country was empty. There's nobody here. We came back here roughly around 1760-ish. We're the original people of the North Shore of Lake Ontario. We're the salmon people. That's what we lived off of. Any river that flowed into Lake Ontario had huge salmon runs that writers of history describe how you could literally walk across these rivers at a certain time of year because of the number of salmon. Many things were happening. The salmon were disappearing. The food sources were disappearing. Settlement was moving in and displacing our people. Agreements were being made at that time which were kind of one-sided by the colonial governments as how to take over our land.
Yahweh, Yahweh, If the British were going to succeed in holding on to their colonies, they needed to cultivate and maintain the relationship with the First Nations. The Royal Proclamation basically says where lands are not required for settlement, that those lands will remain the Indian hunting grounds. In essence, it established a large Indian reserve, for lack of a better term, which was basically off limits to settlement, to traders, and could only be taken up in treaties with the Crown. So it established the treaty process in essence. So the Royal Proclamation is set down in 1763, but if we fast forward to 1783, that's the first substantial land purchase treaty agreement between the Mississauga Nation and the Crown, and that occurs in what is today the Upper St. Lawrence and the eastern end of Lake Ontario, and that's called the Crawford Purchase, 1783, 1784. And even though the Royal Proclamation had set down the process as to how the treaty process would take place, the Crawford Purchase is probably one of the worst examples of that process. There's no written description of the lands that were taken up. The next treaty along Lake Ontario was the Gunshot Treaty. Another treaty or purchase or settlement that is not written down. There's no lands that were delineated in the Gunshot Treaty, but the understanding was that it conveyed to the Crown land as far as a gunshot could be heard. So, I have to ask myself, who shot the gun? What kind of a gun was it? Was it a cloudy day? Was it a sunny day? Where did the person shooting the gun, where did that person stand? How long away from the gunshot did people stand to draw that line? It's sort of difficult to even conceive of how that was done. We look at the map today and we see lines and states and international boundaries, et cetera, but if we're going to understand this treaty process from the 1780s, we got to get all of that out of our mind. We have to erase those lines and we have to try to understand what was at stake for the British. The main thing at stake during this time was relocating those settlers who had been loyal to the King during the American Revolution. And so we see pockets of land that are taken up, which are Mississauga land, to initially secure lands for settlement for the Loyalists. The British Crown just didn't come in and say, we want all the land. We need all the land we can get. They didn't use that approach. They took up lands that they could facilitate settlement on sort of at the time. And we see this as we move in off Lake Ontario frontier, Treaty Number 20, the 1818 Treaty. The importance of 1818 Treaty Number 20 is that when you read the minutes, one can feel the pain and the almost desperation of the people at the time. The Mississauga Nation had 30 years now of a pretty negative experience in seeing and feeling the effect of what those early land purchases had done.
By enforcement of the federal government, we were not allowed legal counsel. The Indian people really believed that the Crown was honorable at the time. They thought the Great White Father would continue to look after them. It just didn't happen.
In the late 1800s, our people said to the government, you are settling into our territory which has never been ceded to you. And finally, the government said one day, okay, we'll form a commission to investigate your claim. And so they went around here on every First Nation, had hearings.
And when they had the Williams Treaty, I was 5 years old, and I remember going over there because I lived right across the road and eavesdropping through the windows and wondering who these guys were. They were speaking a different language than I'd ever heard before. But they had interpreters, and they were Indians from up north.
The Williams Treaty First Nations are the only First Nations in Canada whose rights to hunt and fish have been held to be extinguished by the Supreme Court, by all the courts. At the end of it, a document was produced which may or may not have reflected what people understood, but which certainly within a decade was being interpreted by the province of Ontario as meaning that the people who signed it had given up all their rights. And the moment that that interpretation hit the street, those people were protesting immediately, saying, no, we never would have agreed to that. It's not what it said. I'll go to jail before I'll give up my right to fish or my right to hunt or my right to trap. And many of them did.
We're living on the land, people who live in a sustainable fashion. that we made sure that if we were to use the land, that it would last us forever. However, what happened with the 1923 treaty, because we were forbidden to live on the land, we had to sneak around. Of course, the government on the other side had all kinds of game wardens here. It almost seemed like at times there was an army of game wardens looking over us.
There's a lot of documented evidence where the people said they just gave up trapping because they were being run off the land. In some cases being shot at.
I remember one fellow, they were over at Pigeon Creek spearing muskrats, and the game wardens come along and started chasing them. And this one guy was running away from him, and he jumped over one of those rail fences, and he put his hand down on the rail, and the rail split with a bullet right beside his hand. He never went hunting or fishing again.
But a lot of people did get put in jail simply for fishing out of season. Not just fines, it was put in jail. As things progressed, planes were chasing them in the winter, ski planes were chasing them in the winter and that. And as technology got better, they were able to keep them closer and closer to home.
I done a lot of fishing and hunting and guiding.
Guiding was something we always did. That was my first job, really, was guiding.
Because going go obstacle, you want to see me, you know, see me kuna. Well, give me a time in the local, you know, I'm going to do it on. And we got to Kevin Daddy, he don't want to get, in guide with the
For some reason, Curve Lake was very popular. The lodge was a fishing lodge, and my grandfather operated it first, and the tourists used to come up by train from New York City or wherever. Doctors and lawyers, they were all doctors and lawyers, professional men in those days. They would come a day, a month maybe.
And us boys, we always used to have to live out in the barn when the tourist season was on. Somebody would be in our bedroom, yeah.
The tourist business changed for some reason. Instead of coming for 2 weeks, they'd come for 3 days, and then maybe just a weekend and so on. So we eventually got out of it in '71. The reason we got into the gallery business in the first place was to create employment on the reserve at that time. And the older people were doing quill work and basket work and so on with no market for it. So we talked to the older folks and said, if we can organize a business and market the stuff, will you teach the younger ones how to do it? The younger ones learned the old trades from the older people. We had as many as 200 working for us on the reserve in the craft business. And that was in 1960. So we had a real industry going on Curve Lake.
You get the porcupine in around June, just before it gets warm. My mom used to singe the quills off on a slow fire. I soak them in hot water so they get nice and soft. I used to make teepees for the craft shop up here, quite a few of them. And then I started making the quill boxes. I used to go around Stony Lake and to cottagers selling their baskets and their quill work.
So my mom used to have they used to call it a bee, and they'd get together and they'd help each other out making baskets or quill work. They'd kill the porcupine, and we'd pick the quills. We'd get some dye and dye the quills. They'd clean the porcupine, and we'd eat that. That was good.
And my mother made baskets, and she used to peddle them in the summer. They'd go out in a boat, and they'd go to Bob Cajun. So there was no men in the village in the winter time because they went to lumber camps.
Leave in the fall, and then they maybe come home at Christmas and go back in to break up. And then there was the log drives after that. My stepfather worked in the log drive.
Lumbering was big, and they used to have log drives where they boomed the logs together and floated them down the rivers and so on to the mills in Peterborough. And lumber was what Peterborough was made of, really.
My mother said there's a log drive coming through, and a lot of the boys from Curve Lake here were working on this log drive. And we came to Lakefield, and we watched them there putting the logs through the canal there. It was quite a sight. See them guys running on around on top of logs. And it was the last one, yeah. Last time there was a log drive went down. In 42, I joined the army. Everybody else was gone from here. All the boys were gone, and I was the only guy around here pretty near. When we got over to France, it was 3 days after D-Day. And I was the only chief in our outfit. That was my name, Chief! Come here, you know. So I didn't mind too much.
Going on the Kensin and that Kisha Skilgog, is really in Crash Garden do Doma. Mr. Kimot Michi what now, and Kiwi to get more Dashki not more curve lake. And Koshka in that Emoki in Jipasti curve lake, and Burley Falls and giving out so. He should mock the shearer. He shall go overseas, and he was wounded. Go there. Construct a whole thing, Clement.
We've been involved with wars going back to the War of 1812. We had, I believe it's 20 from this community involved with the First World War. In the Second World War, I think it's 4 to 5 men and women enlist, all returned except 2. And then we had 3 involved in the Korean conflict. They all returned home. So our involvement, not only within our community, but throughout the world, gives guys like me and the members of the community the enthusiasm to continue to move forward.
When I got home, it was in around the 1st of November, I said to some of these guys, "Where are you going?" "They're going on deer hunting." I said, "Leave me a boat on the shore and I'll come up." I came home and dropped off my stuff and got my rifle. Went out deer hunting. First day back. Used to be a lot of rice around these lakes here. All the lakes would be half full of rice. When a guy'd be paddling through the rice beds, you wouldn't be able to see him. The rice grew that high.
This plant was basically a staple in the diet of certainly the Chippewa and the Algonquin people throughout thousands of years, really. Some of these lakes were just so thick with rice you could barely paddle through it. The people used it for not only food, but it also attracted a lot of different types of wildlife: deer, moose, muskrat, beaver, all different types of ducks.
Black rice, or minomen is how we say it in Ojibwe, is considered a sacred medicine, a sacred food of our people. It sustained us, and the grains would fall into the bottom of the canoe. The grains would also fall out of the boat, so they reseed for next year. What we learned from our elders about environmental sustainability is that it is part of our very culture, it's our link to our past, and it's the strength of our future. Our people, we still hunt, we still fish, we still gather wild rice, we still gather those sacred medicines that help our people. And we do this with respect.
I grew up in a home where, it was very crowded. I grew up in my grandmother's home. If you look at that, it's sort of like a small community within your household. So we all had our responsibilities, and certainly if you let your responsibility go, then, the rest of the family suffers. But it also expanded to your neighbors. You were there for your neighbors.
Kanagangi Saagiig min mogon Saagiig Anishinaabe. He do called Sawakwana. Kongwegi de Mosesi. Kongwegi walk to see. Yupanehogi Tom was watching.
That was our upbringing. So naturally, as I grew, that was the theme of being the helper of the community.
When you hear a total stranger tell you about Curve Lake and what they have heard, that is a community and the accomplishments of a community. You notice I don't say an individual you notice I won't say whether it's chief or council, but a community. We get direction and guidance from the community. So that's what makes Curve Lake unique. Back in the 50s, powwow starts coming back, and the crowds start growing year after year after year.
Curve Lake is really well known for their powwow in September. I used to always like to watch when they used to have Miss Curve Lake. My granny Alice won Mrs. Curve Lake one year, and I thought that was kind of cute. The petroglyphs is a rock formation that is located just about 20 minutes north of Curve Lake. It is considered a very sacred and spiritual place among the indigenous people of both North and South America. What is on those rocks are carvings by our ancestors. We refer to them as, in the Ojibwe language, Kinamage Wapkong Asani. That means the teaching rocks. We no longer allow to have pictures taken there because it's a living entity. The old people believe that if you take a picture of those rocks, it kind of diminishes the spiritual life of those rocks.
And so on. It's a very special place. It's in fact a place where creation occurred, or a form of creation occurred. There's a lot of symbolism there which is consistent with our culture. There's a clan system depicted there. The animals from the underworld are all depicted there. That is the snakes, the skinks that live there, the turtle. The turtle is an animal that helped creation happen from the underworld through cracks on the earth. The other thing that is very significant there is that our people could hear the language being spoken by Manitou in the crack. If you were to try and explain this physically, it's the water itself running underneath there. It's like an underground river would make these sounds and echo. Hence, it sounded like a spirit talking. But of course, we know it was a spirit talking.
We work very closely with the Ministry of Natural Resources and the park staff in regards to any traditional or cultural advice that they need. We are very much trying to give the message to those visitors, those scientists, those anthropologists, those archaeologists, to say this place is a live, living, breathing entity that deserves our respect, a place of prayer and ceremony.
One of the places that we've been doing ceremony at for a long, long time is Jacob's Island. But the old people always said that area there contained a lot of burials, and this was a special ceremonial ground.
My involvement in Jacob Island started in October 2009 when the current owners of the property were constructing a new building. Construction work uncovered and damaged some human remains. And as a consequence, it needed an archaeological investigation to determine the nature and the extent of the buried human remains as the first part of the process for then establishing that area of the island as an official cemetery so it can be protected in perpetuity.
Once you bury something, not necessarily just humans, there are other things that we bury that have spirit. And once they're buried, we want to keep it there. Because the moment you uncover, the new person handles this stuff, that spirit that we had buried becomes alive again and can, in some instances, do harm to you. We had special ceremony there to honor those people and rebury them.
Curve Lake has been involved with the work on Jacob Island right from the very beginning, and we discussed together what needed to be done, both in terms of ensuring that the legal and procedural requirements, the ethical and spiritual component of the work involved as well. So we worked together to ensure that both aims could be met. Working with First Nation communities has been a tremendous privilege It's no longer really just about the questions of trying to reconstruct how people lived in these landscapes. It's about relating the archaeological questions to the descendant communities. It's about ensuring that the archaeological sites that we find are treated appropriately and respectfully as part of a larger cultural fabric that emanates from the existing First Nation communities.
Consultation, anything that has to do with impacts to our environment, to our natural resources, to our animal and plant life, to historical items, especially the burial sites, any points where artifacts are found, our medicines and plants that we still look to heal ourselves, and ceremonial places, hunting places. Anything that impacts those areas would be a time that would certainly be a call for consultation. If you're not sure that your project requires consultation, it doesn't hurt to ask. And all we ask is that we have that dialogue. That's our life. It has been our life, hunting, fishing, gathering. That's our history. And that's how we came to be. Everything goes back to creation. It is a belief that we are put here to look after what the Creator has given us.
Our legends say that when the First Nation people left the Creator's side, the gift we were given was the gift of spirituality. The obligation that we were given was to look after the earth. That was our responsibility. And it is evident to this very day that our people across Canada, across Turtle Island, take this responsibility still. That means when Mother Earth is being compromised by mining companies, by oil companies, pollution of the water, it's up to us to stand between that destruction, that violation, and that Mother Earth. That's our obligation.
Anything that deters the natural beauty is just not a respectful way to treat our Creator's work here. That's our teaching. We do what we can to make sure that resources are intact and we have sufficient amounts for generations to come.
I'm a historian. That's what I do, that's my passion. And so from that perspective, it's important that I try to work within the community to better understand our own history and better understand our own historical relations with the Crown and in the modern sense with the federal and provincial crowns. I think the one thing that is the underlying issue for me is that in the public school system, our history has been pretty spotty. A better understanding of the First Nations story in this country, in this region, needs to be told.
You know, just going back and looking at it with regards to claims and treaties and those types of things, never heard much of them during school. Never learned much about them until things started happening in the 70s and 80s and 90s when the courts were making some decisions that were affecting all First Nations across Canada. In 2003, got word from the federal government that they were going to accept a couple of claims. We did settle the Islands of the Trent claim. When they did the 1818 treaty, they included the lands, but they did not include the islands. So when they were selling those islands on our behalf, we were not getting proper compensation for them. That was 1837, they started flooding for the Trent Canal. We lost areas of land and so on. So we filed a claim and we did get compensation on that. We think it's fair compensation for that. But that's, right from 1835 to now, it's almost 200 years. The other claim that we've got going now is one where when they set aside the reserve, they flooded. They didn't compensate us for that. So some of our land is underwater right out the islands and that. October 2012, the Deputy Minister of Ministry of Natural Resources sent a letter out to the chiefs of the Williams Treaty, the 7 First Nations, saying, well, geez, maybe the 1923 Williams Treaty wasn't trying to get rid of existing treaty rights. If the basket clause has any effect, it's got effect on future rights. It doesn't have any effect on past rights. You still have the right to hunt, fish, trap, gather. You can continue to do that.
Yahweh,
We're getting volumes and volumes of historical information that are coming out of the litigation. How do we get that information from where it sits now in the Federal Court of Canada? How do we get that into the public school system, into the high school system? That's the key, I think, is education, helping people of all stripes understand this better.
I also think that education is a big thing. We need young people to want to be leaders in this community. We need to inspire them to get their education and be part of the leadership in the future.
What's really important to the future of Curve Lake is the young people. It's important that the young people know at least conversational Ojibwe. It is that language of the people that really is the culture. So it's our challenge now as Curve Lake First Nation to maintain and to revitalize that language, Anishinaabe.
In Curve Lake, you can still hear the language, and that's a real beautiful thing about Curve Lake, is that the language has been maintained and it's been nourished and fed, and the people today are able to build on what's always been there. It's a great community. It's beautiful land. It's played an important part in my life.
I think Curve Lake is pretty special. I think that we're a very close-knit community. We plan together, we work together, we play together. So naturally we celebrate together.
And I would encourage anyone, whether they're a youth, a young adult, or even an adult, to get involved with your community. No matter what the issue is, no matter what the event is, no matter what the circumstance is, get involved with your community so that you know what your community is all about. If more people get involved, the better community you will have.
It seems to me to be a place where I belong.
So now it's my honor to be able to introduce Chief Keith Knott. As I mentioned, certainly Chief Keith Knott grew up in Curve Lake and has devoted his life to the community as an employee, community representative, counselor, and chief for over 40 years. He was married to his late wife Bubbles for 62 years, is the father of 5, and is a papa to 12 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren. I don't know if those numbers have changed, Keith. So he is a prominent figure in the Peterborough area as a champion of First Nation people and an active volunteer in community projects. Chief Knott is a recipient of the Order of Canada, an honorary director of laws degree from Trent University, and has received the Paul Harris pin from Rotary International. Chief Knott has also received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Anishinaabe Nation. He has successfully negotiated land claims and has been instrumental in construction projects such as the Curve Lakes Health Center, Small Business Center, and the non-denominational church. Chief Knott has received recognition from Southern Township of Trent Lakes, City of Peterborough, and the County of Peterborough. He has served 11 years on the Ontario Geographic Board and 11 years on the Peterborough County and City Board of Health. Chief Knott is also a recipient of the Civic and Leadership Award from Trent University, as well as an honorary alumni. Chief Knott works with municipal, provincial, and federal governments and sits on committees and working groups with the Nation, sorry, Keith, the Saagiig Nation and the Chiefs of Ontario. He continues to use his traditional knowledge to ensure the voices of Indigenous people are heard and respected. So it's indeed, on behalf of the Lakefield Historical Society, my honor to be able to welcome you.
Ani Bojo. Ani Bojo.
Ani Bojo.
One more time. Ani Bojo.
Ani Bojo.
There we go. Now you learned a new language. Miigwet samin on the kid. Kawet bakuan sa mga Chippewa kita yan. Nigan kabwe, nishlikas. Makwa, makesen doda. Saagiig mong don jepa. Himan daw. What I just said is that my spirit name is one who stands in front. My clan are the the bear and the eagle. And I'm from Curve Lake, and also the chief of Curve Lake. As I have mentioned, this is my ninth term altogether as chief of Curve Lake First Nation. Altogether, I'm on my 29th year as a member of Curve Lake Council. I have served my community in various positions over the years. It's going on to 60 years now. And when you enjoy every moment of serving your people, what a great feeling you have. And when you meet your members, wherever it may be, they greet you with great harmony and the enjoyment that I get out of those greetings. I retired from politics, I think it was in 2012. My wife was ill at the time, so I took the time off. My plans were never to go back into politics again, but I learned to say never. At this past election we had, it'd be 2 years this June, my community spoke. They asked me to come back to run for chief, in which I did. But lo and behold, that was a prescription that I needed to bring me back to where I am right now. After the loss of my wife and diagnosed with cancer, then that is a prescription that I needed. It really lifted me, brought me back. They tell me I look pretty good, pretty fairly healthy, which I do right now. In fact, this past Monday, I went and got a physical, so I guess things look good. So I'm still around, and that's very good that I see. But it's pretty hard. At this point in time, I didn't know they were going to show us this video of Saagiig. A lot of things they were speaking about in that video I was going to speak on tonight. Maybe in some places I might duplicate it. As you all know, that I am from Curve Lake. I'm within the mighty Mississauga Nation, and Curve Lake is part of that. Curve Lake, as you've seen on the video, has a long history. And how we are connected to the Creator and Mother Earth, as you've seen through the video there. Curve Lake has had at least 3 to 4 different names. The first name was Oshkigamon. You seen it on there. That is the original name of Curve Lake, is Oshkigamon. The Indian agent and Indian Affairs kept changing our names. We were also known as Shamong Village. We were also known as Mud Lake. And then finally we were known as Curve Lake. So Curve Lake in Oshkigamon is about the same thing. That's basically what Oshkigamon means, curve. And we have a lake on both sides of us and a narrows at the end. So that's where your curve comes into play, and the lakes on both sides for Curve Lake. That's basically what Oshkigamon means, curve. Shkimonga. And that reflects again. You all pretty well know that we are governed by an Indian Act that is being legislation of Parliament. There again, you sometimes wonder, none of this hasn't gone through what we have. Our name changed all the time. Maybe they don't really want to understand on who we are. We are called Indians. We are not Indians. We are Anishinaabe. We're called Aboriginals. Do I look Aboriginal? I look original. I don't know where they got that ab from. And that's what I've been telling them ever since I was a chief at meetings. I am not an Aboriginal, I am original. The first peoples of this land. And now what do they call us now? Indigenous. I don't know where that comes from. What does it mean? That's not who I am. I'm not an indigenous person. As I look around here, you have given one name. You're either Scottish, English, Irish, French, or what they call Joganash, which is a white person. Those names have been carried. They don't change every so often. When the Department of Indian Affairs wants to go in a different direction, they'll change the name. It was called Indian Affairs at one point in time. It was called Aboriginal Affairs. Now Indigenous Services, Canada. But you notice though, we haven't lost our humor, we haven't lost our intelligence about this whole thing. We still move forward. They weren't able to drag us down. We're stronger than ever. And I just like to go a few things with you. Give you a clear understanding on the number of acts that was entitled to us. Let's start off with the Indian Act. Who have heard of that word Indian Act before recently, before the Truth and Reconciliation come into effect. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That Indian Act, the Indian Act is a principal law through which the federal government administers Indian status, local First Nations governments, and the management of reserve land and communal monies. The Indian Act does not include Métis and Inuit people. The Act came into power on the 12th of April 1876 and consolidated a number of earlier colonial laws that sought to control, remember, that sought to control and assimilate Indigenous people into Euro-Canadian culture. The Indian Act has been amended many times over the years to do away with restrictive and oppressive laws. However, the Act has had historical and ongoing impact on First Nations culture, economies, politics, and communities. It has also caused intergenerational trauma, particularly with regards to residential school. So that gives you a little bit of outline about the Indian Act. And that act was put into place for control over the first peoples of this land. And you know that that still happens today. And you're looking back here at 1876 when that Indian Act was made and passed through council. That still happens today. You look at the reserves that we are on. We call them now First Nations. We have purchased a number of properties that came available for us to purchase to extend our land base, because we're looking 7 generations ahead. Not just next month, next year, but 7 generations ahead, where the land will be available for those unborn at this point in time. It's unfortunate what we have to do. It's unbelievable what we have to do. We just completed an 18 to 20-year process on what they call addition to reserve, ATR. We buy this land. Our First Nations pay for the land. We buy it. There are so many obstacles and hoops that we have to go through in order to give it away for it to become reserve land. It's unbelievable. We have to get approval from Ontario, Canada, Hydro One, Telephone, or any other one who has interest in that land. Mineral rights, it's way beyond. And what do? After we pay all that money for that property and go through that agony that we go through, it becomes Crown land, belongs to the federal government. It is unbelievable, heartbreaking. It put in your head and make you want to climb up that wall on what we have to go through as a people. It no longer belongs to our First Nation. It belongs to the Crown. So you see some of these difficulties that we have to go through, and that is part of what I just read regarding the Indian Act. And also, the British created the first Indian department to manage affairs between the colonial government and indigenous peoples. After Confederation, the British transferred this responsibility to the Canadian government, the federal government of the Indigenous and Northern Affairs. And right now you can see the transformation of things that is happening. There are more areas in which the federal government has transferred some of those to the provincial government. Keep in mind, the provincial government is also part of the Crown, same as the federal government. Their responsibilities are to the Crown. That's why some of these responsibilities now from the federal has gone to the Crown. Another one was on October 7th, 1763. The Royal Proclamation of 1763 lays down the basis for how colonial administration would interact with First Nations people in the centuries that followed. The proclamation guarantees certain rights and protections for First Nations people and established the process by which the government could acquire their lands, and it also provides guidelines for negotiating treaties on a nation-to-nation basis. They spoke of the treaties and the film that you just seen. They spoke of a number of treaties. Williams Treaty was one of them. The 1818 Treaty. The 1818 Treaty that was negotiated. The hunting, fishing, gathering in our traditional way was protected in that particular treaty. The Williams Treaty, when it was signed, and I don't believe wholeheartedly that the leaders of our community, if they totally knew what was in that treaty, it wouldn't have been signed. What they call is a basket clause. The basket clause included that we give up all of our hunting, fishing, gathering, traditional way of life, and any other rights that we had. And that was under the Williams Treaty. And keep in mind all these treaties that we have signed over the many years, they had to be signed by two parties. They had to be signed by the First Nations, and they had to be signed by the Crown. And what does that tell you? That tells me there's a line right down the middle here, 50-50 on everything. All the rights, the minerals, timber, everything within this country. It was supposed to be split evenly. You wouldn't have the First Nations community in the states they are in, most of them today, if they upheld those treaties. On August the 10th, 1850, Act for the Better Protection of the Lands and Property of the Indians in Lower Canada. This 1850 law is one of the first pieces of legislation that includes a set of requirements for a person to be registered as a legal Indian. Which basically says, was turned to status Indians. That came with the Indian Act in 1874. A legal Indian. Were the first peoples of this land illegal at one time? You know, were we illegal? But they felt to pass a legislation in 1850 to consider us legal. Can you believe that? And then they put the other word as status. Yes, right now I'm a status Indian. What does a status mean? What is a status Indian? The Department of Indigenous Services are now, they give us a number that says you're the status Indian with that number that I have. It's just like being in a concentration camp. They stamp a number on you. That's almost the same thing. We're status Indians with a number, and that's what they know us by, is by that particular number. Even my pages don't want to come apart. Now here's another one. June the 10th, 1857. The Gradual Citizenship Act. The Gradual Citizenship Act requires male status Indians and Métis over the age of 21 to read, write, and speak either English or French, and to choose a government-approved surname. It awards 50 acres of land to any sufficiently advanced indigenous male, and in return removes any tribal affiliation of treaty rights. Can you believe that? Can you believe that? Requires a male, status Indian or Métis, over the age of 21 to read, write, speak either English or French. What did that tell you? We couldn't speak our language. We weren't allowed to speak our language. I believe that's what it tells me. And that kind of gives you another idea as we move down this road. It says again on March 29, 1867, under the Constitution Act, British North America Act, the federal government takes authority over First Nations and the land reserved for First Nations. This authority would later extend to education of status Indians. Do you believe that? This is some of the things. I don't know whether you've have heard of this stuff yet before or not, whether this is new to you or not. The Gradual Civilization Act and the Gradual Enfranchisement Act aims at removing any special distinction or rights of First Nations people to assimilate them into the larger settler population the government begins unilaterally enfranchising First Nations people, the fact that only one person voluntarily franchised under the Gradual Civilization Act suggests that Indigenous response to the colonial law was unfavorable. Efforts to assimilate Indigenous peoples to Euro-Canadian culture were always met with resistance on behalf of Indigenous people and their communities. So that resistance has been there all along. It has been only heard on deaf ears. First number treaty is signed. A number of Indigenous groups made treaties. In particular, the first 5 number treaties were Canadian governments before the 1876 passing of the Indian Act. Those groups may consider their legal identity as First Nations people to flow through those treaties rather than through the Indian Act. Those numbered treaties, most of those numbered treaties are out west when those treaties were signed. Just to give you a few more little things. The Indian Act is introduced. The Act aims to eradicate First Nations culture in favor of assimilation into Euro-Canadian society. The Indian Act does not directly pertain to non-status people, including the Métis and Inuit. I went through these things today in my office just to bring a little bit of history for those gathered here this evening, to give you a general idea what the first peoples of this land had gone through and is still going through. We were a number of our ceremonies were canceled. The federal government outlaws potlatch ceremony, winter dances of Indigenous people in British Columbia, bowing to pressure from missionaries. And then we come down to another heartbreaking in our lives. Amendments to the Indian Act in 1876 provide for the creation of residential schools funded and operated by the Government of Canada, the Roman Catholic, Anglican, Methodist, Presbyterian, and United Churches. Now you see, and this is August the 1st, 1985. This was a big, to this day, really heartbreaking, a heavy heart, to hear the stories of torture, punishment, abuse of these little children that are only 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. This is very difficult to believe that another human being could do that to a child. A child is the most precious thing in our lives. They are the future for each and every one of us. I got more and more I could speak on the various acts that was, this is right full of them, of some of the acts that have been made in order for the governments to control. All it is all about control. It is so hard to do these things. I'll try and move on to that for now. I got two, three little more other things I'll speak about. One is I'd like to speak about our veterans. We have members from Curve Lake First Nation who served in the War of 1812. As you heard on the film there, the number that were involved from our community in the First World War, Second World War, the Korean conflict. And there's one thing that we do prior to every council meeting. We acknowledge all of those who served in the armed forces. Along with a prayer before we begin our council meetings. We acknowledge all those veterans, men and women. I believe it was the First World War that 100% of our eligible young men enlisted to fight in the First World War. Let's keep in mind also, we volunteered in all these battles. We weren't enlisted because they couldn't enlist us, because we weren't a Canadian citizen. That's why they couldn't enlist us. We weren't Canadian citizens. What bothers me more and hurts quite a bit is that when the veterans come home after the battles in the First World War, they met so many friends and buddies during the battles. They wrote a letter to the federal government, the head of the Department of Indian Affairs way back in the day. They asked, we would like to become a Canadian citizen to be equal as our friends were. A letter came back to our veterans. The answer was no. The answer was no. There's your control. We need to control we need to control you in every move you make. That is why for us it's very important that we acknowledge our veterans at every meeting. They are the ones that fought the battle so that we can be free. Free speech. Be as free as a bird's fly. You know, and that's why they should be acknowledged not only on November the 11th, but acknowledged every day of the week and every opportunity possible. We have no more World War I veterans. We have no more World War II veterans in our community. We have no more Korean veterans in our community. They have all moved on to the spirit world. And that's why we don't forget the service that they provided, the trenches on which they fought from, for us, for everyone. And on another note, some for Curve Lake, we had the first woman chief ever elected in Canada from Curve Lake. We had the youngest chief ever elected in Canada from Curve Lake. That was in 1952. Legal age still at that time was 21. They may be younger ones now, but back in that day, 21 was the legal age. We have a good number of wonderful leaders. In fact, they're all wonderful leaders of the day. You will never hear me criticize any leader. Whether some may be angry with Trudeau and some other people, you won't find me bad wording anybody. It's a role and responsibility that they took on to try and do the best they can for the members of our country. In this way, I acknowledge every chief before me, and I'll acknowledge everyone after me. Because I know the roles and responsibilities. I never criticize anybody unless I've walked in their shoes, and I know what it's all about. You know, and that's really good for me to have that feeling. Even anyone, if I an administrator or a doctor, no matter what he prescribed for me, I can't criticize him because I haven't walked in his shoes. I didn't take his education. You take it as it comes, and that's what we, as the first peoples of this land, has done all this long. Took it as it comes, but now we are beginning to feel a little more vocal on some of these things. Here's some good news. Yeah. Well, I thought maybe I wanted to hear a little bit of good news for a change. Back in the 5th of April, 1847. Do anyone know here knows what that's about? No? That was the Irish famine. You know now? It was in 1846 and 1852. Was one of the most traumatic events in modern Irish history, with the repeated failure of the potato crop upon which 2/3 of Ireland's 8 million people depended. The social and economic fabric of Irish life was torn to pieces by the early 1850s. 1 million people had perished from hunger or disease, and another 1.5 million simply left Ireland. And some who left Ireland ended up in Canada. Perhaps some in this particular area. Just also to let you know that one of our former chiefs from Curve Lake, by the name of Peter Nogi. Have you heard of Nogi's Creek? That's just before you get to Bob Gajan. That's named after that particular chief, Peter Nogi. Here's a letter that he sent. And this is Chemung Village. Remember I mentioned how many names Curve Lake had? One of them was Chemung Village at that time. The 5th of April, 1847. Sir, we received your letter informing us of the distress of the poor of Great Britain and Ireland. We have held a council and authorized you to forward, I think it's 12 pounds till shillings out of our nudity money, and we further assure you, only from our poverty and our present, and would willingly subscribe a larger sum to assist our friends in the British settlements from the friendship we have received from them in former times. I'm Peter Logie, our chief, and the greater part of our Indians were at the council, and all present willingly subscribed to the above ineligible, and as few of them were from home, and trust that should they be present, they would have willingly have sanctioned the grant as them that was present. We only let you know that their absence, least complaints should be made that they were not present. As we borrowed a few pounds from Mr. Gilmore, we think it's right to remind you of it, as he, Mr. Gilmore, is expecting as soon as you can, with convenience, send it to him as it was a provision that he advanced. So you see, even in a time of need, the struggle our people was going through, and what we are doing. And this is our people, the first people. They seen another people, not only this land, but the land across the pond, and offering. I think it's 12 pounds, 10 shillings, I believe it was. And not only, it wasn't only Kirk Lake that responded to that. I have a whole list of First Nations, even around here, Hiawatha, Oliverville, New Credit, Tynanega, Manitoulin, Scugog Island, Rama, Beausoleil, Georgina, Saagiig Lake, Huron, Nawash. The list goes on and on, where our first people seen another people in distress, and they offered their help monetarily. So you see, we the people, the first people, are so strong and with big hearts. Wherever there's a need, we try to fulfill that. Even though we're struggling at home too, it's the same thing. In the early days, when somebody was in need in our community, there was always somebody there with a helping hand. As I mentioned, I've seen so many changes within our community, even here in Lakefield, since I was a young boy. You know, I'm glad I'm still around to see all these things happening and able to talk about it. All of those you've seen on our film there, the good majority of them have now moved on to the spirit world. And you know, it's Doug Williams was one of them who spoke quite a bit, and he's left but 2 years ago now to the spirit world. You know, and he made a great contribution. He was the chief of our community for one term. And our contributions, not only within our community, but Trent University is another one. Trent University, when the first president, and then we were first talking about building a university in Peterborough. One of our former chiefs again, Dalton Jacobs, approached the founder and the president of Trinity University. He offered him $2 to begin that process of building a university here in Peterborough. And followed up on that, they had a walk from Trinity University to Curve Lake as one of the fundraisers towards that also. And we done one not too long ago, a couple of years ago. We done a 50-year anniversary of that walk. So our community has worked side by side with our surrounding communities when and wherever possible. And our women, as you see, making baskets there, you know, it was a joy watching it. There's one particular elderly lady I used to go and visit when I was maybe 12, 14 years old, watching her make these baskets, these quilt baskets. What artists they were. Very artistic on how they were able to draw the form or the picture, whatever they were going to put on the boxes, boxes, and the way they moisturize those quills. They put a whole handful in their mouth and keep moving it and move them around. I just get the shivers right now just thinking about it, you know. I expected a quilt to get stuck here somewhere, but you know, they had that act on how they were able to do it. Real wonderful on how they were able to do it. These are some of the things that we've seen. May has a bunch of pictures over here where she's brought from some of the history of this area, of Curve Lake, Burley Falls, Balsam Lake. Balsam Lake was one of the first reserves for Saagiig Island before they moved to where Saagiig Island is. May has been a tremendous help for us in collecting some of this history that we have. You know, and it's rewarding and great that we're able to have members of our community that is talented in so many ways that they can help us do this. There's more and more that I'd like to add tonight, but we can leave that for another day. You know, if it might be a nice sunny evening to meet outside somewhere and talk about nature, how precious nature is, and how the Creator created these things for us. You look at all your trees. They're not just only a tree. You cut them down to make paper, I guess, paper and firewood and for houses. But where they stand there too, they also serve a purpose. Nests for birds, for squirrels, and also shade. That's the Creator's, Mother Nature's way of keeping things cool. Mother Nature's air conditioner, you would say. Get under the shade there, you get cooled off. There's your air conditioner. You know, you look at all these things the Creator has created for us. The beautiful flowers. You see the animals that roam around. Look at the beaver. Can you imagine a beaver and his talents? How he can build a house half underwater and half above? he knows how to build his apartments. And you know how he made, you have seen his own swimming pool. He wants a place to swim, so he makes a dam. You know, and there's the swimming pool. And you know, if the dam should break, he doesn't run to the office and try and figure out what to do next. He just jumps in his swimming pool and goes fix the hole, and away he goes again. You know, we got so much to learn from our animal friends, Mother Nature around us. You know, it's exciting, really exciting if you stop to think, and just look at an apple. That little wee flower that comes out on a tree in the spring, and look what it produces. It's amazing how nature works. And this is why we've got to be very careful. They keep talking about climate change. We're seeing it happening now, rapidly, not much faster than what we thought. So on that note, thank you very much for the invitation, for coming to speak with us this evening, and I hope I was able to entertain you a little bit, and may you enjoy the rest of the evening, and thank you all again, and have a very good, happy Easter. Enjoy your children, your grandchildren, and all the little ones around you. Life is beautiful. Be blessed.
Keith, I'd like to thank you for a very interesting presentation, a perspective that we don't, as European historians, hear that often. And as thank you for your presentation, we're giving you this gift, which is a donation to your community to use as you see fit. It's a small compensation based on what we've heard today. And I can't help thinking, having European descent myself, I felt a little uncomfortable at times hearing what my ancestors did. But it's that uncomfortableness that makes us aware today. How are we going to change if we don't understand what was done in error, what was done wrong, what was done intentionally to destroy the First Nation, is the best way I can put it. And that's the truth part. The reconciliation part we're working on. I'm happy to see that people at least are talking about it. And I think we are moving in the right direction, although it could move faster, quite frankly. But thanks once again, Keith, for coming out. Chief,
Thank you.
very much appreciate.
It's a correction. Fine.
And if I could prevail upon you to draw the winning ticket here. Oh, hold on, we got a question.
My understanding, did you say that if Curve Lake purchases property adjacent to Curve Lake, that you don't actually own that, the Crown does?
Crown owns it now. Once we turn it into reserve land, it belongs to the Crown, federal government.
Really?
That's why do you think they are called reserves? They are called reserves because before all the court cases that are taking place, the Indian Affairs expected all status Indians will be run out in no period of time. In Curve Lake, I think it was 1985 or something around there, not far down in the distant future, anyway, there would be no more status Indians born in Canada. And this is why you call them reserves. Just as if you're going to a restaurant, you reserve a table there, and that's yours till you get there. When you no longer need it, it's no longer reserved for you. This is it. Why they figure our status would run out, we no longer need it, so it comes back to the federal government. So each time we buy land, each time we want to have it part of the reserve so that we can do what we want with it, then it goes to the Crown, federal government. We keep in mind also that these things are very hard to deal with. If we can buy the land and say this is Curve Lake land, the only difference is a tax exemption of that land. That's the only difference. When it's reserve land, it comes Crown land, then you don't have to pay taxes on it. That's the only difference.
Ron, your hand was up there. Since you're one of my students, I could actually, he was one of my students, I thought. That's right, you didn't teach me much, but okay. I saw him over here half a stone's throw away right past school, and that's 1960 when you folks amalgamated. I'd already been on the Curve Lake area reserve several times before that, but because I had a tiny fraction of you didn't know that. We'll tell you. Here's what my question I'm getting around to right now. When we amalgamated, the kids, we started writing, of course, and I found that if I wrote 3 lines, your language took 2 pages. Now, I think we could work on that sometime. Thank you, sir.
You want me to answer that?
No observation, I think.
Yeah,
I knew about 99% of all those folks you see up there. Murray, Cliff Weetong, and I taught Cliff Weetong's kids and so forth. So, but that was my problem all the time. I didn't learn too much Ojibwe because it stretched out so much after writing.
Keep in mind that some of those words that are stressed out could mean 2 different things. Because each word might mean a little different than the way you talk about it. You know, it's
I enjoyed it. Beautiful language.
Oh, it's a wonderful language. Best language in Canada.
You still have time to learn, Ron. Any other questions? Yes, Meg?
When is that acknowledgement by the Irish government
I don't know either, so.
Yeah, it wasn't on the Facebook page.
Well, I don't do Facebook.
No.
Oh, yeah, it's a good thing. Okay, I think we better do the round. It looks like people are going to head for the door there. Thank you. Okay, the last 3 numbers. 610. 610. Ah, here we have. Diane.
Yes, of 142 raised, 50/50, $71 comes your way.
Oh, yeah, so you can't make money coming to the Historical Society. Thanks once again, Keith. And just a couple of housekeeping things. You see on the side there are 2 pictures there that we're raising money by selling. And it's a silent auction. And so take a look at them. They're both done locally. And we will announce the winner of those in our May meeting. So you have 3 months to put a bid in. Our next meeting is Thursday, April the 25th. And Laura Elliott is coming to speak. She's the author of Ghosts of Catherine Parr Trail. And sort of timely because one of the pictures here, of course, is Westall, which is the final home of Catherine Parr Trail. It's over on the west side of the river. So we hope you can come to that. As far as our monument money raising, we have pretty well wrapped it up. We're waiting for a few people to actually send their checks in. But The monument in Cenotaph Park will be erected in September of this year. We've already put the deposit forward. So that's good. Maureen, we can't put a sign on it saying real estate by Maureen, but she's thinking about it. I know, I saw you clapping over that, otherwise you would have got away with it. But thank you all for coming. We do still have some refreshments in the back, so if you want to stay, eat a few things, have a coffee, and talk to people, please, by all means do. Thanks once again.